fears that some of the government officials had, that young people in those days were not all demonstrators and rabble-rousers and that type of thing. So I feel a closeness to Rotary because of that fact, and I'm very happy to be here speaking in front of you here today. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. The purpose of this presentation is to cover some of the basic points about the TPP, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I'm going to be using a PowerPoint presentation that is spun off from a keynote presentation and has become a movie because there is not yet a concurrence of systems between Apple and Windows, and it became a little complex. The transition is not perfect, but it's close to perfect, so please bear with me. We're going to begin by looking at the TPP in terms of its essential function and its essential purpose. The background music that you're going to be hearing shortly is from a very famous movie called Top Gun, and it's called Danger Zone. We recently had a Culture in English by Movie presentation on Top Gun and Danger Zone. For 130 million working Americans, the TPP, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is a danger zone because there's a fear that it will take away essential jobs which have already been drained from the United States. For working Japanese, over 80 million, the TPP is a danger zone now. And there's a huge fear on the part of many Japanese. For the Republican Party in the United States, it's also a danger zone, but it's a good danger zone because as a Reagan Republican, I'm aware of the fact that essentially the Republican Party is split in the United States, but the one thing everybody agrees on is that President Obama should not be given so-called fast-track authority in order to implement the changes that the TPP would offer. Fast-track authority is, Elaine, do you know what fast-track authority is?
I guess, yes.
It's the power to negotiate an agreement without approval of Congress and without modification after negotiation of the agreement. It is thought that fast-track authority is necessary for people to successfully negotiate any agreement, especially the major powers that are trying to negotiate the Trans-Pacific Partnership. For China, the Trans-Pacific Partnership represents a danger insofar as it is believed to be an attempt to exclude China from the economic growth and vitality of Asia. So there's a deep suspicion by China. And for worldwide globalization advocates, anti-globalization advocates, the TPP is a major threat which would give unprecedented power to corporations and infringe upon rights of labor, environment, etc., etc. So the question becomes, how would the TPP begin, and what essentially is TPP? Is it a creature of the United States, or did it begin differently? The myth is that it is a United States invention. The reality is that it began significantly years ago as a much different organization, sometimes known as TSCP, sometimes known as P4. The original countries that started the predecessor to the current TPP did not include the United States. New Zealand, Chile, Brunei, and Singapore. On your screen you can see a map showing what the current negotiating parties to the TPP are, and those parties essentially have expanded beyond the core countries, which again were Brunei, New Zealand, Chile, and Singapore, to include the United States and Japan, Malaysia, Vietnam, Australia, Canada, and Mexico. Potential TPP countries that may want to become involved include the Republic of China. China has got a very dualistic feeling about TPP. On the one hand, it feels threatened and it feels excluded. On the other hand, it feels that it must become part of the TPP. Still, on the other hand, China is creating its own version of TPP, and guess what? China is excluding the United States from its own version of the TPP. Does anybody here know what SWOT is? S-W-O-T. SWOT analysis. I'm going to try to, what is SWOT?
It's strength, weaknesses, AT. It's an abbreviation for
SWOT. Opportunity.
SWOT. Opportunities
and threat. SWOT analysis is a very basic form of analyzing any potential problem or any potential issue. And today, in the very short period of time we have, I'm going to try to do what President Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, fondly said was cover everything, just like my grandmother's nightgown. I'm going to try to cover everything. I don't think I'm going to succeed in covering everything completely, but like President Johnson used to do fondly, I'm going to barely cover everything, just like his grandmother's nightgown used to do. Now, the first element in our SWOT analysis is the S, or the strength. What are the strengths of SWOT? What are the strengths of TPP? Essentially, TPP is a semi-global regional tariff reduction designed to bring a much greater range of goods and services, specialized goods and services, competitively advantaged by the countries that they come from, to as many consumers as possible. It's designed to reduce tariffs. It's designed to make these products more affordable. It's also designed to achieve a global integration of sorts, to bring standards into a more modernistic, into a more global, into a more advanced framework. In Japan, and this is my personal opinion, it's going to bring about a convergence of cultural and business standards that will more closely approximate global standards. It's going to result, and again, this is an interactive presentation. If anybody here has a different opinion, if anybody here disagrees, please feel free to raise your hand and please feel free to interrupt and state your opinion. But in my judgment, Japan's bureaucracy is going to be losing a number of philosophies that it is currently culturally forced upon Japanese. Meishihoko, the requirements of self-sacrifice by Japanese citizens for the benefit of the group. Senyu Kotaki, first distress, later pleasure. These are two major concepts outlined in the book by Masao Miyamoto, MD, in his book Straitjacket Society. And I believe that the greater integration, the greater communication, the convergence of standards by the TPP will ultimately result in a lessening, a severe lessening of this type of thing in Japan, and a greater convergence with cultural norms that are considered more global. What are the weaknesses? I've already mentioned the favorite quip of President Lyndon Johnson about his grandmother's nightgown, that it covers everything. This is a strength of the TPP, but it's also a weakness of the TPP, because I believe the TPP, in a sense, is trying to cover too much. It's trying to cover every basic sector, every expanded sector in global commerce that you can think of, from agricultural to commercial aviation, from space aviation to biotechnology. And from low-grade industry to auto industry to sweatshop type manufacturing. Every conceivable sector that you can think of is a target of the TPP. And I believe that this is essentially a weakness. Another weakness, and favorite political saying, is that reality is not the most important thing. Perception is the most important thing. And unfortunately, although I don't believe it's the reality, the perception of many countries around the world, and certainly the perception of China, is that the TPP is essentially a vehicle to contain China. And I don't believe that's the case at all. But the truth of the matter is China was not invited amongst the first 4 nations. China was not invited to join the TPP when it was expanded to include the United States. When Japan was lobbied by the United States to join the TPP, China was not invited then. And I believe that the perception that is lingering out there that China is the target of an anti-TPP crusade is going to be a weakness of the TPP. And in fact, right now, is a weakness because the Chinese are engaged in a gargantuan effort to create their own version of TPP, excluding the United States of America. A third weakness of TPP is the United States Congress. The one thing that Republicans and conservative Democrats agree on in the United States Congress is that Obama cannot have, should not have fast-track authority to conclude that TPP. As long as this opposition remains adamant, then there can be no conclusion of the TPP. And the TPP has essentially been delayed 3 times already. It was supposed to have been resolved years ago. Most recently, it was supposed to have been resolved last April. Before that, last November. Now this November. And my prediction is TPP is not going to be concluded as a multilateral agreement even by this November. Another weakness of the TPP is that it is suffering from political instability in major countries. What are the major countries? One of them is the United States, and we've talked already about the lack of consensus for fast-track authority to President Obama in the Congress. And this is an issue that is bringing together conservative Democrats, conservative Republicans, Tea Party Republicans, moderate Republicans, liberal Republicans, and yes, even some liberal Democrats who feel that the TPP threatens American growth amongst regular American workers. Political instability in Japan. There's a lady who was destined to be the next female prime minister of Japan that is no longer the justice minister. Who's the lady? What's her name? This is a test. Who is the lady who resigned as the Japanese justice minister just a couple of days ago? Yes. And there's another lady, the daughter of a past prime minister, who also resigned as the head of the Trade and Industry Ministry in Japan. 2 resignations at a time when TPP is coming to a head, at a time when the political stability of Japan is being looked at by countries all around the world. One of the women had been destined to be the next Hillary Clinton, who was destined to be the next president. It probably isn't going to happen, but she's still destined to be the next president. And in Japan, there's been 2 major resignations. There's a huge opposition in Japan by the agricultural sector, which now enjoys a 778% protection by way of tariffs on rice. And still, even with this protection, California rice, organic, is cheaper than rice from Tohoku. We buy it from the internet once a month, we know. There's opposition by low-level manufacturing lobbies in Japan to the TPP, who have the same fear, the same concern, the same revulsion about Vietnam, about Malaysia, about other countries that the United States did about Japan in the 1960s. So it's gone full circle. What is the opportunity, the O of TPP? The slide has brought us to a point that we're going to deviate slightly. We're halfway through our SWOT analysis, and at this time I want to explain a little bit about why I've spent 19 years in Japan. And it's evidenced in this slide right here. There were dangerous times in the 1920s as well. It was ethnic cleansing by Turkey against Greece. 300,000 Greeks died as a result of a systematic slaughter of Greek civilians in Asia Minor and in particular Smyrna. A Japanese ship, which was one of 5 Japanese ships patrolling the area at that time, disobeyed a British commander's order that said, do not begin evacuating. Let the two sides fight it out. The Japanese admiral started evacuating Greek civilians, amongst them my grandparents, and that's the scene of the evacuation in Smyrna during the 1920 and 1921 period. Although nearly 300,000 Greeks died from the ethnic cleansing, over 300,000 Greeks were saved because after the Japanese admiral violated the order, the American admiral decided to join the Japanese admiral. Then the Italian admiral joined. Then the French admiral joined. And finally, the British admiral joined. So as a result, hundreds of thousands of Greeks were saved as a result of one Japanese admiral saying resolutely, human life is more important than the orders of the commanding great power. Probably the brightest phase in Japanese history in the 1900s. Unfortunately, not known amongst very many people. Let's get back to the TPP. What are the opportunities that the TPP gives us? First of all, my favorite French philosopher was quoted as saying, work is love made visible. I think Elaine-san knows that French philosopher very well. The TPP is good for Japan because it will give Japan work. It will give Japan equal access to government contracts in countries like the United States that it does not have right now. Sectors that will open up include telecom, health, and environment, as well as energy and other traditional strengths of Japanese research and development. TPP politically is going to force politicians to fund initiatives in so-called avant-garde areas of commerce that the government has been reluctant to doing so far. Recently, Prime Minister Abe placed $2 billion in the Agricultural Ministry coffers to fund a 3-year project to develop new varieties of soybeans, rice, garlic, onions, and buckwheat. Without the threat of TPP, it is doubtful to me that Prime Minister Abe would have done such a thing. There is a potential $600 billion or US $6.2 billion market for so-called functional foods. Fruits, vegetables, and grains with health benefits beyond regular nutrition. Japan's senior citizens are swelling at an unbelievably high rate, and they can take advantage of the added health benefits from these products. National agricultural research developing new strains of soybeans with elevated levels of conglycidin. Beta-conglycidin is a storage protein that can reduce fatty acids and defeat cardiovascular disease and diabetes. The U.S. company Monsanto received approval from the Agricultural Ministry for genetically modified soybeans with higher oleic acid that may help to reduce LDL cholesterol. Opportunities for export of these types of GMO products without tariffs will aid Japan if the TPP becomes a reality. Pictured on the screen now is one of the biggest threats to the TPP. TPP is a mystery wrapped in an enigma. It is highly secretive. As some of you know, I don't like secretiveness, I like openness. And I think that the TPP is an example of a process that has been defeated, in a sense, by an overly emphatic paradigm focusing on secrecy. Needless secrecy. But I think this is a problem. And I think that the continued perception that the TPP is an overly secretive process is going to not be of assistance in ratifying and gaining the necessary political support that it must have. As I said before, another threat to the TPP is that it's just plain too big. It covers too many areas. And it doesn't even barely cover the areas because of another type of problem which is emerging amongst countries now. The problem that is preventing the TPP from effectively covering each area that it's attempting to cover is nationalism. There's been a resurgence of nationalism in many countries that are engaged in the TPP discussions. This resurgence of nationalism is compelling those countries to resist efforts that would impact their current competitive advantage in terms of their tariffs that are aiding them to politically sustain their power in their country. In Japan, the Agricultural Ministry is an example. In other countries, such as Malaysia, it's other products, tobacco control, on and on and on. And it's the nationalism, the resurgence of nationalism in these countries that is preventing the political dynamism necessary to gain the consensus that would make the TPP negotiations a success. I would say that as far as a reason for the continual delay of TPP, the secrecy, number one, but a close second, the resurgence of nationalism as a barrier to effective negotiation. China is another example of a lingering, complicated factor. There are those countries that feel that a TPP that does not include China cannot be an effective TPP. China is now engaged in a huge convergence of strategic interests, economic strategic, military strategic, with Russia. So China is going to be a very tough bargainer in the event that it chooses to become involved in the TPP. Not only that, but China has its own free trade initiative underway. It is actively seeking to engage every single country in the Asian sphere except the United States in its own economic zone. In addition, there are other initiatives for TPP, similar to TPP, engaged in other parts of the world that peripherally could include some nations in Asia that are making it difficult to achieve consensus by those nations. So in short, all of these things are making TPP a difficult sell for many countries. Even Japan has its own version of the TPP, which is called CEPEA. And Japan is seeking to lead a free trade initiative in Asia. So the trend for globalization is strong. The trend for reduction in tariffs is especially potent and will continue to be potent. But counteracting this trend of change in the world is a resurgence of nationalism that is primary amongst all major countries, and complicating it is the perception, and in this case it is a realistic perception, that secrecy is the hallmark, the foundation of the present TPP. This contributes, this magnifies the problems of political instability in the United States, in Japan, which has been demonstrated by the two major resignations that just took place several days ago. And these trends are not going to make it easy, even as the delays continue, to make TPP a reality. What is my best judgment? My best judgment is that there's a 50-50 chance that the TPP as a multilateral trade agreement simply will not happen, that it will degenerate to a series of bilateral agreements, or at the most trilateral agreements between Japan, the US, and certain other countries. But only time will tell. A lot is going to depend upon the political stability or stabilization, or upon the lessening of the political destabilization, which is now going on in Japan. A lot of it's going to depend on US elections. A lot of it's going to depend on events that we have no ability to predict, no ability to control. But in conclusion, I think the TPP is one of the very vital areas of concern for anybody engaged in global business today, anybody interested in international politics, anybody with a desire to lessen trade barriers and to create a more fair, equal global society. Thank you for having me here today. I've reserved 2 minutes for questions and answers. I hope there are some questions. I hope there is some discussion. I hope there is some debate. And I look forward to the opportunity of speaking about this in other areas as well. So if you have organizations, causes, groups that require or that request this type of presentation about TPP, please don't hesitate. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to your questions. Yes.
This negotiation is successful, and the import agricultural goods comes into Japan. Would they follow Japanese rule of products where it comes from, or who made it, or if it's genetically tempered or not, or are they going to insist that it will not appear that way?
Well, I think if you were negotiating for Japan, the answer would be yes, they will follow the Japanese standard, because that would be a condition written into any agreement at all concerning the TPP. I think if I were negotiating on behalf of Japan, it would also be included. So I hope it's included. If the Japanese negotiators are strong enough, it will be included.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
それでは、パパトネスありがとうございました。
Thank you.